Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. I'm your host, Billy Parvatam. Folks, I'm so excited today to be joined by my Virginia Tech class of 2019 alums, Matt Atkins and Trey Lyle. Matt is a producer for WRIC 8 News in Richmond, and Trey works with CBS Sports Radio in Lynchburg. Guys, it's so great to be able to talk to both of you, especially right on the eve of the World Series kicking off here in just a couple hours tonight at 8 p.m.
Yeah, Billy, good to catch up with you. I'm always happy to jump on and talk some baseball. I'm excited for this World Series to get underway. I think it's a really good matchup that we have. I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Billy. It's a long time no see. I know we exchanged texts here and there. I give you plenty of Devontae Smith tips for your fantasy team, but it's good to see your face. And I see Matt enough, but excited to talk about the World Series.
Yeah, for sure. Matt has actually done this World Series preview pod the last 2 years. And Trey, you've come on once before, so it's nice to have you in the fold here. But let's get right to it, guys. The World Series kicks off tonight. Astros and Phillies. Obviously, I don't think many of us expected this matchup, at least the Phillies, to make an appearance on the NL side. But before we get to the World Series specifically, guys, I wanted to go to you first, Matt. What's been your overall impressions of this playoffs? I mean, I think it's kind of had a mix of everything. It's been very exciting. You look at it, one 15-inning and one 18-inning game, three 100-win teams, the Dodgers, the Mets, and unfortunately your Braves did not make it to the NLCS. The Cardinals got swept by the Phillies and Pujols and Molina's final season. The Astros made their sixth straight ALCS, which I just think is incredible to think about. And both wild cards also made it to the NLCS on the NL side. So, I mean, obviously, if you recap these playoffs, what stands out to you the most, Matt?
Yeah, it's been a really fun postseason. The thing that I think stands out to me the most, and I've talked to Trey about this last week on our podcast, was that the new format of the postseason, where you have the top two seeds in each league get a week off in between the end of the regular season and their first playoff series. I think that has been the thing to watch because, like you mentioned, you see the Dodgers, the Braves both lose. The Yankees went to game 5 against the Guardians in the ALDS, and the Astros, they swept the Mariners, but it was a very close series. I think they had a walk-off home run in game 1. They went that 18-inning game in game 3 that you mentioned. So I think that the week off between the end of the regular season and the beginning of the postseason has had a big impact on the higher seeded teams. And, you look at the National League, the Dodgers and the Braves, they both lost in their division series. So I think that you can look at it and say, not playing for 6 days, that kind of, they cooled off a little bit, and then they have a matchup against a team that's really hot, just won a series, doesn't really bode well for them. So that's been a big thing that I've been paying attention to this year. But overall, it's been a really fun postseason to watch, really exciting, and I think we do have a very interesting World Series matchup.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that Trey and Matt also host a baseball podcast called Foul Ball Area. Highly recommend that you guys check it out on the various podcast platforms. Trey, of course, what would have been your thoughts on this playoffs? Unfortunately for you as well, your Yankees lost in the ALCS, but what's kind of been your overall reflection on how this postseason has gone?
Yeah, we don't need to talk about that. I already ranted on the last episode, but yeah, Matt had to clean that up a bit. I'm gonna do my best for you not have to edit any here, Billy. But I think it's been a really good postseason. I think the stories in this, you had the 2 long playoff droughts ended with the Mariners and then obviously the Phillies. And as someone who is a fan of a Philadelphia sports team in the Eagles, you understand how much that city loves sports and what's going on in that city. And I think the Eagles being 6-0 and undefeated and the Phillies having this run, and you feel that kind of, energy just build and build and build in that city. It's going to be electric come game 3 in Philadelphia. So I that's what I was most excited about. It's just Philadelphia's run, and it felt a little bit like, I know this is going to sting a little bit, even though the Nats did win a World Series after he left, but Bryce Harper fulfilling the prophecy, a bit in this postseason. And this postseason theme, especially the Phillies, is the 2 biggest rule changes coming into the year basically allow the Phillies to win the World Series. You have the postseason adding a team, which makes the Phillies get in. And then the universal DH in the National League, you have Bryce Harper who got beat up, with a thumb injury and really couldn't play in the outfield, can only hit at this point. It's just hitting, and he's tearing it up. He had 500 in the DS 400, 4 home runs. Like the dude's been insane this postseason and has really lived up. And then you have to give credit to the Astros, kind of like repeating what they did in 2019. They beat the Yankees in the ALCS and they swept them, and then they go on to the World Series. And if they win it, it's kind of like they finally win it after the cheating scandal. And it's like, all right, we know what we did, but we still are a really good team. And I think the Astros are proving, I'd say them and Atlanta fight for maybe the best run organization in the sport.
And Matt, I guess to kind of piggyback off what you were talking about, are you a fan of this new playoff format? I mean, I personally like the wild card format in the sense that after 162 games, it was kind of tough to see a one and done format. Now, granted, the Nats benefited from that in 2019, so I can't complain too much. But I kind of like the fact that, hey, 162 games, you do a best of 3 to really see who's the better team, and of course, it benefited the Phillies to sweep the Cardinals. But obviously, as you talked about, you saw your Braves had to maybe deal with the fact that they had a little bit too much extra rest. That's why I kind of like the fact that going into the World Series, both teams have had the same exact amount of time off since they last played on Sunday. But what are your thoughts on this new playoff format? Are you a fan of kind of this expanded format?
Right. So I think it's definitely more exciting. And I'm probably a little biased because the Braves lost to a really hot wild card team, but I'm not really a fan of it so far. I think they could go back to just the 2 wild card teams play a 1-game playoff to get into the division series. And something I've been thinking about it a lot is like it makes it harder for the best teams to advance further in the postseason because they're playing teams that are heating up at the right time, or because it's baseball, anything can happen in a short amount of time. Like you look at 162 games, no one would say that the Phillies were the best team in the National League, but here they are in the World Series. So it makes it harder for the best teams to actually make it to the postseason. So part of me, the baseball traditionalist part of me says, we should just go back to the top 2 teams in each league, just go to the World Series. We don't have playoffs, but I know that would never happen. So I think that I liked the 1-game wild card playoff better than this new format.
I disagree. Because like every sport, the best team never always wins the championship. Like let's look, the greatest postseason in sports is probably the NCAA tournament. And when's the last time truly the best team? I guess Baylor in maybe Baylor, was Kansas the best team all year last year? I wouldn't say so. I mean, they're a really good team. You'd be really good to win, but you get a St. Peter's to make it to the Elite Eight. Like that doesn't it's so. North Carolina was what, 8th seed that made it to the championship game? So it just never happens. It's like the Bengals weren't the best team in the NFL and they got hot late. They went to the Super Bowl. It just never happens. I like it because it provided some fun matchups. It's the reason, we have the Phillies, and I think you're going to have, I really would have loved to see the dynamic between New York and Philadelphia in those series, but I think Houston brings a great crowd, and Philadelphia is going to be better. So I'm pumped for it.
I wanted to ask you guys about a couple of teams here that had their seasons cut short. Matt, I wanted to ask you about the Dodgers. Of course, they won 111 games. They spent all this money, signed Freddie Freeman from your Braves. People were saying, man, this is the greatest lineup ever assembled. And
he cried for days about that, by the way.
Yeah. So they unfortunately lose in 4 games. And I guess my question to you, Matt, is, is it right that people are kind of criticizing them like, hey, these guys continue to put up all this money to put, all these players on the field, and they've only been able to win 1 World Series, which, by the way, was in 2020 during COVID when they only had to play 60 games. I don't think that diminishes it, but for other people that will. So do you think it's right for people to say, hey, you've only won World Series? Or, as we've seen all throughout these years, I mean, it's hard enough to win 1 World Series. That's why there hasn't been a repeat champion since the Yankees in the 2000s. So where do you kind of fall on that side of the debate? Are you of the mindset, look, they won 1 World Series, let's give them a little bit of a pass, but or also, I mean, look, these guys put up all this money, all these players, and now they're talking about even signing Judge potentially. It's kind of, we should expect them to contend for more championships.
Right. Yeah. They've definitely underperformed in the postseason. When you look at the roster that they have and the talent they have and the money that they've spent, yeah, they've underperformed, but they did win that World Series. And It was in the pandemic year, the shortened season. You can say whatever you want, but that was also one of the toughest postseasons we've ever seen because it was the largest field. There were more teams in that playoffs than in any MLB playoffs in history. So they had more teams to go through to get to the World Series. They didn't have, it was all played at neutral sites, so they didn't have home field advantage. So that was a tough playoff year. So that World Series is completely valid. They won that. You can't take that away from them. They should have won more. Like there are multiple years where they should have won the World Series. So yeah, they need to step up and find a way to come through and win another championship, especially when they're spending all the money they have and they have signing all the free agents and trading for all the players that they have. They need to step up and find a way to win. But still a fantastic season from them. Trey and I mentioned this multiple times throughout the year that it felt like no one was really talking about the Dodgers this year. We'd hear about the Astros, the Yankees, the Braves, the Mets, but no one was really talking about the Dodgers, even though they were by far the best team in Major League Baseball this year. And I think it's because everyone just expected them to be this good. So it's like, oh, it's, the Dodgers winning 111 games. That's no big deal. We expected that. But they were a really, really good team this year. Nothing to be disappointed about. They just should have delivered in the playoffs.
And Trey, I wanted to ask you, bigger New York disappointment, Yankees or Mets?
Oh, that's tough. I'll say the Yankees just because the Mets really didn't have a stumble until the postseason. They didn't collapse towards the end. The Braves just played really good baseball and won. I mean, they still won over 100 games. The Yankees were, the best team in baseball for the first half of the season, and then their offense died. And said it, the other day on the Foul Ball Air podcast, it really felt like towards the back half of the season, it was the Yankees needed offense. It's like you have a really good, one really good basketball player, and you're like, bail us out. And that's what Aaron had to do. And, he struggled in the postseason. Harrison Bader was you replace him with Harrison Bader, who had a really good postseason, but Harrison Bader is a great center fielder and, probably maybe the best center fielder in baseball outside of Mike Trout. And he's not going to do what Aaron Judge did. So I'm going to say the Yankees, and I know that's a little biased here, but I think it's because also the Mets were never the favorite in the National League. I would say it was the Dodgers. It was the Braves. The Yankees were the favorite at some point in the American League.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you too. I know Matt's, mentioned this point before, Trey, but do you think Aaron Boone is the right man for the job? I mean, you look at this Yankees team; they have not made the World Series, even an appearance since 2009. In fact, the 2010s was the first decade ever that they didn't make an appearance in the Fall Classic. Obviously, there's questions whether or not they'll re-sign Judge. With the Dodgers may seems like be making a run if Mookie Betts is willing to transition to second base. Steve Cohen with the Mets has a lot of money, so there's been talk of that. So, what's kind of your big picture on this Yankees team? Is Aaron Boone the right man for the job, and do you think Aaron Judge ultimately resigns?
Aaron Judge will be the captain of the New York Yankees and will resign. That I'm going to say that. You think he was bad with Freddie Freeman? Wait till Aaron Judge doesn't resign with the Yankees. I think Judge will end up on one or two teams because I don't think he ends up either on the Dodgers or the Mets. I think he'll either head home to San Francisco or he'll stay with the Yankees, and I'm pretty sure he'll stay with the Yankees at this point. They're too big of a franchise, and they know that guy's the face of it. And he's ultimately, if you're the face of the Yankees, you're the face of the sport, and he's going to stay with the Yankees. And as for Aaron Boone, I'm very much up in the air because the guy, if you let's say he's the manager of any other team like the Texas Rangers. If you go to a Texas Rangers like, hey, you can hire Aaron Boone, and every year he's there, you're going to make the postseason and you're going to make the ALCS multiple times. They'd be like, sign me up. The expectations are different with the Yankees. And it does feel like sometimes in these series, he gets outmanaged. I think of game 1, and it felt very mismanaged. I go back to game 4, where Nestor Cortez is clearly not 100%. He leaves him out there, and he gives up a three-run home run to Pena, and they're off to the races. So, I don't know. He's done. There's moments where he's done more with less. I think of years when the Yankees have tons of injuries, and they still make the postseason. But there are these moments where I am not sure. So like he's coming back, and it might be something in which it's World Series or bust for him at this point because it's gonna be year 6, and we'll see.
I don't know, Trey. I saw, I think his Bleacher Report posted yesterday that he unfollowed the Yankees on Twitter and
Yeah,
Instagram.
Hal Steinbrenner already said he's coming back. So he already signed an extension. So let's sign an extension last year. Hal Steinbrenner likes him. We'll see. Brian Cashman's the one who doesn't have a contract right now, and I would argue that roster construction for the Yankees it got better. They got better defensively, which they needed to do. But would you rather have Gio Urshela or Josh Donaldson in the postseason? Because I bet you Gio doesn't play as bad as Josh did down the stretch. So maybe the issues with Brian Cash. I think he comes back too. I think they're going to bring the band back together, but we'll see.
Matt, last question before we officially transition to the World Series. How do you put a bookmark on your Braves season? I mean, going into the playoffs, and again, we, as you mentioned, maybe the extra rest played into it, but I was doing a podcast with Steven Newman, and he low-key convinced me that the Braves could repeat because he was basically like they replaced Freeman with Olsen, who's done great, and they have Acuna, who they didn't have at all last year. So I was low-key thinking, man, the Braves have a chance to repeat, and obviously we know they came back, down, what was it, 10.5 games in June, the division lead the Mets had, and end up sweeping them and late in the season and end up winning the division and making the playoffs. What's kind of your thoughts on the Braves season? Obviously, I know you're disappointed because, they were a very good team, had a great chance to repeat, but just ran into the Phillies in the wild card and a very hot team.
Yeah, it was a really good season. And I think that this Braves team was even better than last year's team. Losing Freddie Freeman hurt over the offseason, but they replaced him with, the next best option. So Matt Olson was great for the Braves. Having Ronald Acuna back for the majority of the season was great. Austin Riley had a breakout year. Dansby Swanson had a fantastic year at shortstop. It was just a really fun season. They were a really good team, and chasing down the Mets throughout the second half of the season and finally overtaking them and winning the NL East title. That was a great feeling. Once we got to the postseason, I was feeling confident. I was feeling like they had a shot to repeat because they are better, or they were better than last year's team. But as soon as the Phillies won their series against the Cardinals, and I saw that that's who the Braves were going to play, I started to feel less confident because I knew the Phillies had been really hot recently. They were playing really well. And so I was like, this Phillies team, they might pose a significant threat to the Braves. And I mean, ultimately that's what ended up happening. Phillies ended up beating the Braves in the NLDS. So it was a good season. The playoffs were disappointing. I mean, they only won one game in that series. So it was a disappointing performance. It's going to be an interesting offseason for the Braves. Obviously, Dansby Swanson is a free agent. I think that's, the big free agent for the Braves. There are rumors, maybe they'll go out and bring Jacob deGrom in, bolster the rotation up a little bit. So I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if they let Swanson walk and move someone else to shortstop or go after one of the other free agent shortstops out there, but it's going to be really interesting to watch. But overall, it was a really good season in Atlanta.
And I wanted to ask you too, Matt, because I know Trey kind of alluded to it, but what were your thoughts on the whole Freddie Freeman, crying every time he played the Braves? I mean, I just thought it got old after a while. I mean, Freddie Freeman actually is a good guy, one of the good guys in the game, but I mean, it just got to the point where I'm like, dude, you got paid over $100 million. You went back home to Southern California. You're with a really good team who had a chance to win the World Series this year. I mean, it got to a point. I'm like, all right, dude, like we understand you cried that you left Atlanta. I mean, what were your thoughts on that whole situation?
I think it it kind of patched up things a little bit because I think he wanted to stay in Atlanta. It's just his agent and the Braves management couldn't get it worked out. He wanted to stay in Atlanta. And so when he left, a lot of Braves fans were mad at him. They're comparing him to Chipper Jones, who played his entire career in Atlanta, and said that he would never be on Chipper Jones level, or, if he goes into the Hall of Fame one day, that he shouldn't wear a Braves hat on his plaque. But he spent 10 years in Atlanta. He was one of the franchise's best players of all time. So I think when he came back to Atlanta for that series, and when he showed his emotions, when he talked about how much he missed playing there, how much he missed the fans and the city, I think that kind of patched things up a little bit. And Braves fans were like, oh, okay, this guy really does love us. He just, things just didn't work out. So yeah, it was sad to see him sign somewhere else. I really wanted him to come back to the Braves, but I think he did want to be there. It's just, the business side of things, they just couldn't get it worked out.
All right, guys. Well, that's a great discussion on kind of the playoffs overall. Let's now get to the World Series. Of course, the Astros and the Phillies starts tonight, game one, as of this recording at 8:07 p.m. Eastern. You look at some of the big, just kind of big picture notes I have here, Trey, as we kind of look at the series. First of all, it's the largest win discrepancy between the two teams since 1906. Astros had 106 wins, 19 more than the Phillies at 87. Also, you look at the betting odds. The Astros are minus 180 currently to win the series. Houston's pitching staff had the fewest runs allowed. Justin Verlander had a really nice comeback season after he missed the 2020 and 2021 postseason runs, led the AL in wins, ERA, and walks per hit, inning ratio. Jeremy Pena, rookie shortstop, he won the ALCS MVP rather. So, he's coming into the series really hot. Dusty Baker's in his 25th season as an MLB manager at 73 years old. He's the oldest manager to make a World Series appearance. Astros, people forget, are 7-0. I mean, they swept the Mariners and swept the Yankees. And, of course, Yordan Alvarez is having a terrific season. On the Phillies side, everyone remembers June 3rd when they fired Joe Girardi when they were 22-29. And then Rob Thompson comes in and, just takes them on this incredible run. Beat the Braves in 4, beat the Padres in 5. So they've been pretty dominant. Bryce Harper, former National. I mean, he's been incredible. I think it's 10 straight postseason games with a hit. He now has 10 career postseason home runs. I mean, that home run he hit in Game 5 really gave me goosebumps, even as a Nationals fan. And so they're looking to win their first World Series since 2008. And also another great stat: Dave Dombrowski, Phillies president of baseball ops, 5th World Series appearance, first win, first to do it with 4 different teams: the Marlins, the Tigers, the Red Sox, now the Phillies. So said a lot there, Trey. But as you look at this World Series, I mean, what are kind of some key storylines that stand out to you?
I think if the Phillies bullpen could continue staying hot, which was the weakness of Philadelphia, it's just been the weakness of Philadelphia, I think they're going to win this series. I am leaning towards the hot team. I'm taking, I think the Phillies are, I think they're bad. Like, if you break it down, I really like, Philadelphia has the best player in this series, and Bryce Harper, I would say. And I think it's going to be interesting because Houston, what you're going to get from Houston. You're going to get lights out pitching, and then a lineup that is very versatile. They can hit for average, they can hit for power. But I first off, I think it's going to be, they're not, the Astros aren't going to go undefeated in this postseason. They're going to lose. And I think if they lose in Houston, it's going to be a big issue because I think the Phillies, who are 6-1 in Philadelphia, are undefeated. What was it again? 6-1 in Phil? I think they've lost once in Phil. They've either undefeated or lost once in Philadelphia. I don't see them losing in Philadelphia. And so I think it's going to be important for Houston to win these first 2 games. And I don't want to say it will decide the series because we've seen where stuff happened, but I think these first 2 games are going to be vital for Houston to get it done because if Philadelphia comes out with a split, I think the tide will shift and Philadelphia become a favorite in this series.
Matt, of course, this is the Astros' second straight World Series appearance, lost to the Braves last year in 6 games. Most people probably had them favored in that series as well. They're, in most people's eyes, the clear favorite in this series. Obviously, how much pressure is on Houston, and do you think it's time to give the Astros, some credit? I mean, obviously, everyone hates the fact that they did the sign-stealing trash can scandal, whatever you want to call it. But look, 6 straight ALCSs, and they haven't missed a beat since they replaced A.J. Hinch with Dusty Baker. I mean, is it time to just say, look, they had their scandal. The court of public opinion will continue to always view them in a negative perception. But at some point, we got to say this is a good team, especially when you replace Carlos Correa with Jeremy Pena. I mean, this has been a really good core group with Bregman and Altuve and Yuli Gurriel. Here they are back in the World Series again.
Yeah, you got to give it to them. They are the best team in the American League. I mean, like you said, 6 straight ALCS appearances, their fourth World Series appearance in the past 6 years. They are the best team in the American League over the past half decade, more than half a decade now. I mean, you have to respect how good they are playing. And yeah, they had their scandal, but that was 5 years ago. So it's time to move on. They're a very good team, and I think that you gotta respect it.
Any key storylines stand out to you? I mean, I know Trey mentioned some players he's looking forward to. Any players? I mean, obviously we talk about Bryce Harper. He's having a Hall of Fame career. his first World Series appearance. He finally gets to the World Series. We all remember in 2019, when he signed with the Phillies, he said, I just mistakenly want to bring a title back to DC, and the Nats end up winning the World Series that year. But what stands out to you in terms of key players to watch? Sir Anthony Dominguez has been terrific out of the Phillies bullpen. You got Verlander in the Astros rotation. I mean, what stands out to you, Matt, in terms of players we need to watch in this series?
Yeah, for players to watch, I would say Justin Verlander. With the season he's had, he's probably going to win the Cy Young Award in the American League. A fantastic comeback year after dealing with injuries the past couple of seasons. And he won one World Series with the Astros, but that was their scandal tainted World Series in 2017. So if he can win another one, that'll really cement his legacy. He's one of the greatest pitchers of his generation. So it's going to be really good to watch him in this series, see how he does. And I'm looking forward to that. As far as other storylines, just like we mentioned, the scandal and, the Astros trying to clean the slate kind of. And so if they can win a World Series here, then I think, there are still going to be haters out there, but this one is a clean World Series as far as we know. So if they win it, then you got to respect it. Like, move on. They've won another one. It's time to forget about it. So I think that's the big storyline to watch is, can they win another World Series and have it not be tainted by a scandal?
Here's a question I wanted to ask both of you, Trey. I'll go to you first. If you had to pick one guy, who is under the most pressure to win a World Series championship? I mean, I think obviously Bryce Harper stands out. And by the way, I mean, you look at all the former Nationals in this series. For the Astros, you got Dusty Baker, who managed the team for a couple of years. You got, for the Phillies, Bryce Harper, Brad Hand, Kyle Schwarber, Kevin Long, who, by the way, I'm not sure why he hasn't been a factor in some of these managerial candidate openings. So he definitely should get a chance. But obviously, I think most people would say Bryce Harper, but I'm going to also throw out Dusty Baker, because this guy, like we talked about it, oldest manager in the World Series, 73 years old. He's been in the big leagues forever. He's never been able to win a World Series. You think the Astros got a good crew. They'll be around for the next couple of years, but you just have a feeling, man, if Dusty doesn't win this World Series, I mean, how many years does he have left? How many chances will he have left? It kind of feels like, obviously the answer is typically to go with the player, but kind of feel like time's ticking for Dusty, and he's got to get it done this year, you feel like. Trey, if you had any thoughts on that.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, I completely agree. I think Dusty, Dusty's you remember when the Nationals, I mean, he was a great baseball player when he played. He's a really great manager, and you have to give him credit for how, I think he was a perfect man to come in post cheating scandal and kind of, correct things. So that first season post it 2020 was not great. They did not play that great, and they didn't even play in front of fans. Like, I always wonder, like, if they played in front of fans and they had that weird playoff format, do they make, like, and it's a normal season, do they make the postseason? I would guess no. But they got in the postseason and they had a great run to the ALCS, where they lost to Tampa, but they're so consistent, and I think Dusty brings a lot of that. So you have to give him credit. And for Bryce Harper, I mean, he was labeled as the generational guy. I mean, you remember, like, Sports Illustrated had him on the cover when he was in high school, air quotes on that, because I believe he skipped half of high school to go to community college, try to get to Major League Baseball earlier. So he's lived up to the hype, and he's lived up to the $330 million contract, and you have to give him credit for that. So there's great storylines all around. I think for the Phillies and the fact that you got a guy like, Kyle Schwarber, who has won a World Series, but obviously he really didn't get to play in it. He DH'd a bit, but because he blew his knee out, and now he's been, so good this year, and to see him finally being able to play fully healthy in a World Series, that's going to be great. So I think storylines abound in this one.
Yeah, Matt, what do you think about, obviously, Dusty Baker and Bryce Harper? Because in a lot of ways, you look at Dusty Baker, who's so well liked in the game of baseball. I mean, it seems like he's kind of made people root for the Astros a little bit more because he's such a likable guy, and he hasn't been able to get that World Series championship. And then you look at Bryce Harper. I mean, do you think we've kind of forgotten about him? I mean, it seems like, since he left Washington to go to Philly, all these other young stars emerged: Juan Soto, Julio Rodriguez, Vlad Guerrero Jr. Kind of seemed like we almost forgot about Bryce Harper, who people forget won the MVP last year for the second time in the National League. So, I mean, look, 2-time NL MVP. He's had a great career. You think he's going into Cooperstown anyway, but I think a World Series would really kind of add the cherry on top. I mean, what's kind of your thoughts again on those two figures, Dusty Baker, Bryce Harper? Who has more pressure to win, or do you think there's someone else we haven't talked about that you really feel like has the pressure to win?
Well, like you mentioned, Bryce Harper's the reigning NL MVP, so I don't think we've forgotten about him. You know, I think he's still one of the top players in the league, and I think most people would say that. Um, Personally, you know, I still can't stand him. I never liked him when he was with the Nationals, and then he goes to another NL East rival, so I still can't stand him.
I thought you were his best friend, man.
No. I mean, he's a great player. He has lived up to the hype now. For a little bit, I was, you know, I wasn't sold on him. I was thinking that he wasn't as good as he was made out to be, you know, before he started his career, or, you know, at the beginning of his career, everyone touted him as the greatest player of his generation. And for a while, I wasn't buying into it, but now he's living up to the hype, making it to his first World Series. So, you know, he's delivering for the Phillies. I think he's on the track to Cooperstown. But I think Dusty Baker has more pressure to win this World Series because he's been there twice before, once with the Giants and last year with the Astros. He's never won a World Series. He's an all-time great manager, but he has to win a championship to really be up there with the greatest managers of all time. So I really like Dusty Baker. Hiring him was one of the smartest things that the Astros have ever done. You know, they fired AJ Hinch after the cheating scandal came out. They hired Dusty Baker, who, as you mentioned, is so well liked throughout the game of baseball. So that was a really smart move by the Astros to bring him in. And I you know, if I root for the Astros in this World Series, it's because of Dusty Baker and Trey Mancini.
Yeah, I can't do that.
And well, Trey, I did want to ask you, how excited are you to watch this World Series? I mean, you know, the three of us are baseball nuts, so we'll always be excited to watch the World Series. But when you think about this specific matchup, Houston and Philly, I mean, where does it rank in terms of World Series you've been excited to? I'd probably say somewhere in the middle. I mean, obviously, when your team makes
I
it,
agree.
you know, you're.
I think I'm most excited for not more excited for what the Philly fans are going to say to Houston Astro players. That's I would say the number one thing. Like you remember, they chanted DUI at Marcell Ozuna during the series, and now that I've gone to a game where I've been surrounded by Eagles fans and Philadelphia fans, when I went to up in DC for the Eagles Commanders game, they'll say some things, and I am very intrigued to see how they handle the Houston Astros. I know the trash can scandal is gone, and that was a big thing, but it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. I think game one, Aaron Nola versus Justin Verlander is going to be awesome pitching matchup. And I agree. I think I'm in the middle. I think if it was, and this is throwing my fan out of it, if it was Yankees Phillies, I think you have two of the top fan bases in the sport, and that would be a premier series. And so I don't think it's that level, because I think people don't like the Houston Astros. They still don't like the Houston Astros because of the cheating scandal. And, you know, a lot of people are there's not a fan that's in the middle when it comes to the Phillies. You either kind of love them and respect them, or you hate them. The two other people that I am talking to in this podcast hate the Phillies as both NL East respective fans.
Yeah, Matt, I was going to ask you, I mean, how do you kind of approach, you know, when you see, you know, your rival teams kind of do well, you know, because obviously I'm a Nats fan, you're a Braves fan. If the Phillies win, it would be the third NL East World Series champion in the last handful of years. I mean, are you, you know, really just despising the fact that the Phillies made it, especially at the cost of your Braves, or are you more of the mindset, look, this is great for baseball. You see Bryce Harper doing well, you know, you see this run this team has put on. I kind of probably fall somewhere in the middle. I mean, obviously, you know, I remember growing up hating the Phillies when they had Ryan Howard, Jimmy Rollins, Chase Utley. But, you know, in a way, I am kind of happy for Bryce Harper, the fact that he's finally had a chance to make it to the Fall Classic and really put everyone on notice in terms of how great of a player he is. So where do you kind of fall on that spectrum?
I can look at it from a non-biased perspective and say, look, the Phillies haven't made the playoffs since 2009, or no, I don't know, it was sometime around the early 2010s. It's been a long time since they've been to the World Series. I can respect that. It's cool to see a team that has been deprived of success for so long make it this far. but I can't stand seeing them in the World Series. I hate the Phillies. And, it's interesting in the NL East. I don't feel like there's any one team that is the biggest rival of the Braves. So it kind of goes through like periods of who I despise the most. The Marlins are never a threat. So I don't like the Marlins, but I don't really worry about them. For a
Wow,
while,
disrespectful to the Marlins.
I hated the Nationals because they were the best team in the NL East, but they've kind of fallen off now.
Ooh,
So
taking shots at the guy who invited us on.
So this year it was the Mets. I could not stand the Mets because they were
You
the
always
good team
can't
this
stand the
year.
Mets. Wait a minute. Time
I
out.
mean, yeah.
You're like, oh, I just started hating the Mets this year. No,
Okay. I guess
I'm calling BS on that, my
Okay.
friend.
All right, fair. I always hate the Mets. It's been a while since I felt this strongly against the Phillies because they haven't been good for that long. So now that they're good again, it's like, oh man, I kind of forgot about the Phillies, but yeah, I can't stand them either. So I don't like seeing them in the World Series, even though it's like, they beat the Braves in the playoffs. So it's kind of like, root for the team that beat you because then you were a better team. No, I don't buy into that. The only thing, it would be kind of cool to see the Astros lose a third World Series to an NL East team because the Nationals and the Braves both beat them in the World Series. So that would be kind of cool, but I can't root for the Phillies at all.
Trey, I wanted to ask you too. I mean, something I think that's kind of made the news recently, and I think this really puts a lot more spotlight on Dusty Baker's appearance in this World Series, is the fact that this is the first World Series since 1950 where no U.S.-born black players are on either roster. So what do you think that says about the state of the game of baseball? I mean, I know there's been a lot of talk that it shows how much the MLB is maybe outreach to, Latin countries and, Asian countries like Japan, but maybe back at home you're losing African-American athletes to basketball and football. I mean, what do you think it says about the state of the game? Or do you think this is just a one-time thing? Even Dusty Baker said, you look at some of these drafts, a lot of these top prospects are African-American. So what's kind of your take on that whole matter?
Yeah, I think it's a one-time thing at this point because I believe there was a record for African Americans drafted in the first round this year. I believe. I'm not sure on that, but I think it's an abnormal. I mean, like the face of the sport, you could argue, is African American in Aaron Judge. Like he is, you look at. There are still, like, if the Yankees made it, like the two biggest stars in the Yankees are African American.
Mookie Betts,
yeah, Mookie Betts. You want to throw in too, like there are some great African American players in this league, and so I think it's an abnormality. I also think baseball is very unique. Like it's so diverse in terms of, like the international game is now coming into the NBA a lot more. You really don't see it in the NFL. Hockey is very international, but baseball, I think, is even more, especially with Latin American countries. And baseball is trying to make a better effort to reach back out to the inner cities and expand the game there as well. So I do believe it's an abnormality. I mean, there's an African American manager in this series with Dusty Baker. So I think the diversity of the sport is really good, and I think it's going to grow. I hope it grows. Because you could argue the greatest player to ever played well, like three of the greatest players to ever play the game are all African American. When you look at Willie Mays, Barry Bonds, and Hank Aaron, so it's definitely something in which the game has to work at. I think it did take a dip, and that's what results in this World Series. But I think it is in part an abnormality because baseball is working on trying to expand the game in demographics towards African Americans.
Matt, what are your thoughts on some of the new rule changes that are coming next season? When you look at it, the shift is pretty much being banned. You look at limits in terms of pickoff attempts. They're really trying to speed up the game in terms of implementation of this pitch clock. I know you're a very strong baseball traditionalist. So where do you fall on the spectrum? I mean, are you of the mindset, look, like this is the way the game is played. It's inherently slow. It's not as fast as football and basketball. Leave our game alone. Or can you kind of see, I mean, look, maybe I don't like this rule, but I can understand it and might help actually make the game more entertaining. I mean, where do you fall on that spectrum?
The limit on pickoff attempts, I'm fine with. The pickoff attempts are boring. They rarely result in any success. No one likes watching a pickoff attempt. Like just play the game. Banning the shift is the dumbest thing since the universal DH last year. So, it hasn't been that long since we've had a a rule that I didn't like. But if you can't hit when players are in a certain defensive position, do better. Like, become a better hitter. Figure it out. Like, that's how the game is played. You're a player. You tend to hit the ball in one direction of the field, so that's where the defensive players line up. Hit it the other way. I mean, that's how you like make adjustments to be a better player, or lay down a bunt. It's really not that hard. I just don't like banning the shift. Like, that's the defense figuring out a way to beat you. Now you figure out a way to beat them.
Pitch clock, though, what do you think about that? Do you think they'll make a tangible difference in terms of at least hitting the ball in play?
I don't know about the pitch clock. I mean, how are they going to enforce that? Like, we've seen pitch clocks in minor league baseball for a couple of years, and I never see it enforced. The pitch clock runs out and no one cares. So that'll be an interesting one to watch. I'm not, we do see batters and pitchers take a lot of time in between pitches sometimes, especially in the postseason. But I just don't know how they're going to enforce that. Like, I mean, maybe what is the penalty or what have they said what the penalty is if you go past the pitch clock?
I believe it's a ball, I think, and then I think if the hitter takes too long, it's a strike. So, I mean,
I don't like that because, it's not a ball or strike. So I don't think there's any good way to enforce that. So I'm not a huge fan of the pitch clock.
Trey, what do you think? I mean, are there any? I tend to agree with Matt. I do like the pickoff attempt limit. I mean, like, very rare that someone actually gets picked off. And I do agree that I think the shift, banning the shift is not, hey, if you want to be a good hitter and, they're playing you on the right side, bunt to the left. I mean, you got to adjust. What do you think about that?
I agree. I am. I agree with both of you. I mean, do I understand the move, and do I kind of like contextualize like, all right, baseball is not trying to cater to me because I will watch whatever. They're trying to cater to a larger audience, and so how do you do it? All right, well, you need to increase offense and speed up the game. And how do you do that? You ban the shift, you put a pitch clock in, you limit pickoff attempts. Like that. That's all the moves they're trying to make. So I think that's like, so I understand the rule changes. I'm not the biggest fan of them. But if you go back to little league, when you played little league, you didn't shift. Like, this is a new thing. Like, the shift is a relatively new thing. So like, I think it will look more traditionally like baseball, because like, if someone's watching a baseball game, maybe played in little league, hadn't watched in a while, and they see the third baseman at shortstop and the shortstop in left field, and like, they're like, what is going on here? Like, they're paying, like, so I think that could be a good thing for more of a general audience.
So obviously great discussion there. Well, let's get right to it, fellas. It's time to make our money predictions. And for context, so the 2 years, I guess you can include this year 3, that me and Matt have kind of done this podcast. We have both agreed and we have both been correct. We both picked the Dodgers in 2020 and both picked the Braves last year. So given that pressure, Trey, I'll go to you first. Who do you think wins this World Series? Give me how many games they win it in, and also give me the an MVP prediction.
I'm going with the hot team. Give me the Philadelphia Phillies. There's going to be a party in Philadelphia. One of two they're going to have when the Eagles win the Super Bowl this year. And I say they get it done in 6 games. They'll get it done in Philadelphia. And I'll go with Bryce Harper. I think he keeps it up and he'll win MVP.
Matt, what do you think about your prediction for this series? By the way, I mean, you look at tickets too. I think a World Series game in Houston's like 500, and in Philly it's like 1.2K. So it was pretty similar too when it was Houston and Atlanta last year. So it seems like these NL East teams are really excited to see their team for the first time in a while in the World Series. Trey had a comment about that.
I was going to say, to add to the fun, the Houston Texans and the Philadelphia Eagles play on Thursday Night Football next Thursday, which it should, if it would have been perfect, it would timed out where like they're in Houston and then that game happens, but they're actually in Philadelphia. And so it's weird. So like, if you're a Philly fan, you could go like spend a week in Houston, go to the game, and then go to 2 games.
For sure. Yeah, that's another interesting point. So Matt, the floor is yours. Who do you think wins? How many games, and an MVP prediction?
I'm going with the Astros. They're undefeated in the playoffs so far. They're the best team. They were the best team in the American League all year. They're way better than the Phillies. The Phillies are hot. And, we've talked about that, the hot teams sometimes end up winning in the playoffs, but I think the Astros are just too good. I think they win it in 7 games, though. It's going to be a competitive series, going to be fun and entertaining to watch. And I'll go with Yordan Alvarez as the MVP.
All right, so we got 1-1. Trey's going with the Phillies. Matt is going with the Astros. And I think one thing, again, we've talked about this before to kind of keep note of, both teams have the same amount of rest going into the World Series. You know, it's not like, you know, the Astros played a game 7 2 days ago and now they're going in and they're kind of more fresh in terms of game experience, or vice versa. So I think that's going to be something very interesting to watch. I am going with the Phillies to win the World Series. I'm going to say Phillies in 7. Bryce Harper is my MVP prediction. I just think, like Trey said, they're the hot team right now. It pains me to see Dusty Baker potentially lose another World Series, because again, I think we all agree, and most baseball fans agree, we're all fans of his. But I just, you know, something about the Phillies seems magical, and I think, you know, especially if Trey says if they can close in Philly, actually, so it wouldn't be in a game 7, but if they can close it in Philly, I think it's going to be exciting to watch. But there you go. I mean, for the first year since we've been doing this, me and Matt disagree. He's going with the Astros. Me and Trey go with the Phillies, and
It's okay. You're aligned with the smarter person now, so that's good.
That's right. So, you know, before we close out the podcast, I do want to kind of ask a couple of big picture questions about kind of the game and maybe some teams to look out for next season. Matt, I feel like we have this conversation every year. What's kind of your thoughts on the Angels and how they're wasting Mike Trout's career, and they may even be trading Shohei Ohtani in the future? Obviously, they fired Joe Madden earlier in the season. I mean, what can the Angels do to at least make it to the postseason? I mean, I feel like we're being robbed of watching Trout and Ohtani in the playoffs. Anthony Rendon, I mean, they signed him, but as you mentioned last year, I mean, that's just another bat that doesn't really solve their pitching. I mean, how do you diagnose what's going on with the Angels, and how can they solve it?
Right. I think pitching is still the issue. And, you know, Shohei Ohtani is a great pitcher, but he's just one guy. They need a whole rotation and a bullpen. They went out and signed Noah Syndergaard last year, but obviously that didn't work out for them. And now he's on the Phillies in the World Series. So it's still pitching, but I think, you know, they might just need a complete overhaul of that organization. And I think the owner has said that he's willing to sell the team. So, you know, that might change some things. They just hired a new general manager recently, though. So I don't know what needs to change there, but something does, because you're right. We should see Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani in the playoffs every year, and it's really disappointing that we're not.
Trey, how about the New York Mets?
Free them. Just blow. Like, we'll see what happens when they sell the team.
Yeah.
And what organizational changes they happen. I ran about the Angels a lot because I believe Mike Trout might be the greatest baseball player we've ever seen. Shohei Ohtani is the most unique player we've ever seen, and it just sucks.
Trey, what do you think about the Mets? I mean, we didn't specifically discuss them earlier, but obviously they've got a lot of question marks. You know, whether or not they're going to be able to re-sign Jacob deGrom. Are they going to, you know, pay upwards of $100 million for Edwin Diaz, who was their stud closer this last year? Buck Showalter's another guy like Dusty Baker. He's been in the game for a long time. He's well liked, but he also has not been able to. I don't even think make a World Series. So, you know, he's kind of someone who has a lot of pressure. I mean, Steve Cohen, he's no joke. He's going to spend money. They may make a run at Aaron Judge. I know you don't believe it, but you never know. So what are your thoughts on the Mets, on their forecast going into next season?
I think they'll make a run at Aaron Judge. I just don't think they'll sign him. I think Jacob deGrom is going to become Matthew Atkins' favorite baseball player soon. I think he goes to Atlanta. And I think if you're the Mets, you re-sign Edwin Diaz, and then you hope Scherzer could stay healthy, and you kind of, you know, who do they add? And I think they're gonna try to become very Dodger Yankee like, where old Yankee like Yankees are building from within a little bit more than they used to be, but like spin, acquire as much talent as possible, and then try to see it on the field. I thought the Mets were like a year early this year, a little bit to some degree. So I think they'll be better next year. They might lose Brandon Nimmo too. I think Colorado's reportedly offering him a big contract. So they're going to have some holes in this team that they need to replace, but I expect them to spend, and we'll see what happens.
Matt, two managers that come to mind. I mean, you look at Joe Madden and Joe Girardi, both were fired unceremoniously this season. Obviously, look at what the Phillies have done since they fired Joe Girardi. They're in the World Series. Do you think these guys manage next year? I mean, I think, honestly, my personal opinion, what I would like is I think the Nationals just need to restart, fire everybody, completely restart. I would love to see a package with the new ownership, if they can get like a Theo Epstein and a Joe Madden together to kind of rehaul the team. So that's kind of my dream scenario. I don't think that'll happen, but you never know. But what do you think? You think Joe Madden and Joe Girardi manage next year, and how do you think Joe Girardi especially looks, especially with the Phillies making the World Series?
I think both of them could manage. They're still very good managers. I really like Joe Girardi, and I like Joe Madden too. They both have World Series experience. I think that they're both very good managers, and I think that if the right opportunity comes along, they both could still manage next year. I don't know about what the Nationals. You really want David Martinez gone?
I mean, I think look, if you look at his track record, even the year they won the World Series, it's not like it was great. I think if he had gotten fired, no one would have said everything. No one would have said anything. I mean, at best, you can make an argument he's a 500 manager. Now you can also say, look, the team is rebuilding. You want a kind of a player's manager, a guy everyone likes, like Davey, to kind of rebuild. But honestly, I'm of the mindset. Look, it's been a few years since the World Series. I'm not opposed to just kind of cleaning house and starting all together anew. Because again, you really also don't have a face of the franchise. I mean, you've got C.J. Abrams, you've got Josiah Gray, Keibert Ruiz. You've got these young pieces, but since they've traded away all these faces of the franchise, I'm just kind of the mindset. Look, maybe just it's better to clean house and just start completely over.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But yeah, I could definitely see Madden or Girardi coming back to manage somewhere next year.
And Trey, I mean, in terms of and I'll ask you this question as well, Matt. If you had to make a bold prediction right now, I mean, we're October 28th, 2022. Game 1 of the 2022 World Series hasn't been played yet, but like next year, you look at 2023. Who are two teams you think, man, one from the AL, one from the NL, you think could have a chance to make it to the Fall Classic?
Oh, if you said Fall Classic, so I was gonna say if you make the playoffs, I'm gonna say Baltimore.
That's who I was gonna say.
I was gonna say I think Baltimore will make the playoffs next year. I don't know about the World Series. I think their team, they were so good this year. Next their expectations.
They were probably a year ahead too, as well.
Yeah. So I'll say Baltimore. I don't think they make the World Series, but I think they'll make the postseason next year. In the National League, that's tough. I'll say the Giants bounce back. I believe in that organization. I think it'll be so. If I had to pick a team that did make it, that will, I'll say the Giants. I wanted to say Miami because they have maybe the best pitcher in the National League. But I'll say the Giants because I trust them more.
Matt, I'm going to go with the White Sox as one team. I mean, I thought this was a team that really had the core to make some noise.
They'll fix their manager problem. At least.
That is true. Yeah, I think Tony La Russa gone is good. I don't think he was the right fit. And maybe Joe Madden's
never been hired.
Yeah, I think maybe Joe Madden's kind of the guy that might be a good fit for the White Sox. Get Jose Abreu, of course, Tim Anderson, Lucas Giolito, another former National who's excelling with the White Sox. So I'm going with the White Sox in the AL, and then I'm going to stick with the Padres in the NL. Obviously, they had the whole Tatis situation come up, but if he comes back next year, I mean, that's another bat that they didn't have. That's the whole reason they got Juan Soto in the trade from the Nats, is to make a couple of postseason runs, potentially win the World Series, push all their chips to the center. So I'm going Padres and White Sox. Who are two teams you think have a chance to make it all the way again next year?
Well, first I want to say I don't think Cubs fans would like it very much if Joe Madden goes to manage the White Sox. That would be interesting to see.
Yeah, I don't know if that's happening.
For the National League, I'm with you on the Padres. I say they have a good shot at making it further next year and possibly making it to the World Series. For the American League, I'm gonna say the Seattle Mariners go out and sign Aaron Judge and make it to the World Series next year.
That's not happening.
The All-Star game is also in Seattle as well.
Yeah, So that's my bold prediction. They sign Aaron Judge, go to the World Series.
Kind of an express round here. Favorite baseball movie, Trey? If you had to pick one, you're sitting down and watching.
Major League. Lock that thing down. Greatest baseball movie.
Matt, how about yourself?
Sandlot or 42? Either of those.
Gotcha. I'm actually going to go a little bit old school. I'm going to go with Pride of the Yankees with Lou Gehrig, the Lou Gehrig story. Kind of think it's a great movie about a great man, not just on the field, what he did. So I'm going with that. Then my other question I want to ask you guys is, me and Matt had this conversation a few years ago when we talked about how bad the Long Gone Summer 30 for 30 was on Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa's home run chase in 98. Is there a 30 for 30 or a sports documentary that you would like to see that hasn't been done yet? I mean, Trey, is there one that stands out to mind you think for baseball that'd be a great kind of story to pursue for a documentary?
I think Bonds, man, they haven't really done one on Bonds. I think the Astros scandal would be a good one. Tom Brady getting a divorce, which is the reason I kind of zoned out there in the middle of it because it was announced on Twitter.
Wow.
So that's outside. I had to throw that in there, but I will say because Jeter, I would have said Jeter before this year, but they just came out with a Jeter one, and we've seen A-Rod. So I will go with Barry Bonds. I think that will be a good one because he was so good when he did the thing he says he didn't do. Like he was all, and I'm someone who believes he should be in the Hall of Fame. Matt disagrees with me, but I think Barry Bonds doing a story about him is ultimately what needs to be done because he's the greatest hitter maybe we've ever seen, and he was a really good left fielder. So I'll go with Barry Bonds.
Matt, I'm going to go with 30 for 30 on Cal Ripken Jr. I mean, you talk about 2,632 straight games. I mean, that's a streak that's never going to be broken now. And, just kind of the way he did it with Baltimore. I mean, they only made the playoffs like 3 times in his tenure there. I mean, he just kind of seemed like, his type of player, a guy who stays with the team for his whole career. It's few and far between these days. So I think a 30 for 30 on Cal would be a great 30 for 30. How about you? Is something that hasn't been done for baseball that stands out to you?
I think one on the Cubs 2016 World Series would be a good one. Just kind of chronicling their rise from being one of the worst baseball teams in the league to making it far in the playoffs in 2015 and then winning the World Series in 2016. Kind of the way they built that team and took them to the top of the baseball world. I think that would be a good one.
My final question for both of you, actually, Trey just alluded to it, is do you think known or suspected steroid users should make it into the Hall of Fame? I mean, I've kind of gone back and forth on this, and I think, recently I've kind of tended to align with what Trey said earlier. I mean, look, it's so hard now to really say, oh, well, we know this guy did it, but we know this guy didn't, and then kind of just decide who gets in and who doesn't get in. I'm just of the mindset now, like, look, put them all in. I mean, it was something they used at the time, and especially in the case of McGwire and Sosa, it did help kind of bring fans back to the game in 98. And, even though Barry Bonds, obviously we all know he did it before, I think it's pretty statistically obvious that he is a Hall of Famer. So, Trey, what do you think about that? I think you would probably agree with me. I just think at this point, it's hard to differentiate each individual case. Just put them all in if they weren't induction.
Yeah, and Pete Rose deserves to be in the Hall of Fame too. Like, literally, criteria for the Hall of Fame is to tell the history of the game. And let's be frank here, they're already connected steroid users in the Hall of Fame. And the real reason they're not in the Hall of Fame is because McGwire, Sosa, Bonds, Pete Rose too, were not in favor with the media. Like, that is the real reason they're not getting in. It's not, they use the steroid use as an excuse, as a scapegoat. Like, if you want to say that, David Ortiz shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. What? Jim Thome shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. Jeff Bag, like, those guys are connected to steroids too. And it's, Roger Clemens is one of the best pitchers we've ever seen. And he's not liked. And that's why he's truly not in the Hall of Fame. Like, you can tell. Like, listen to the people who talk about why they shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. And it's really more because they don't like the guy. And that, I think, is what's really wrong with our Hall of Fame process, because it's not because of their steroid users, or we'd see no one in there who's connected to steroids. And you can't black out this era of the sport because it was also arguably the most popular era of the sport, and they let it happen. So that's why I am very much in the favor of they should be in. You can honestly say, like, this person is connected to steroids. Like, it's a story. Like, it's very easy to do that.
Matt, what do you think? I know you tend to be more of a traditionalist, but where do you stand on that whole debate?
Yeah, I just can't justify putting steroid users in the Hall of Fame. That's just, it is tough to differentiate, who was actually using, who wasn't. It's a really murky area, but I just can't justify it. So, like, the guys like Barry Bonds, Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire, I just can't you know, they were great players, but they were using steroids, and I just can't justify them making it into the Hall of Fame.
Another thing too, I mean, this is a whole nother conversation. They need to let more dudes in the Hall of Fame every year. I mean, we've had years where, no one hits 75%, so no one gets in. I just think, look, man, some of these guys, it's pretty obvious, or you can make a good case they're Hall of Famers. Like, let's kind of open the field a little bit and let some of these guys in, especially while they're alive. I mean, I think it's important to do that. So that's kind of something that's kind of been a pet peeve of mine as well. So we'll see if that ever changes. But man, guys, I just saw the clock. We are just over an hour into this podcast. Really want to thank both you guys for joining me, talk about the World Series. You guys already do it enough on Foul Ball Area, which again, everyone should check out on all the different podcast platforms. Trey and Matt, thanks so much for joining me. Trey, good luck to your Eagles, and Matt, we'll see what happens with the baseball offseason, what goes forth.
Yeah, it should be a good one.
Thanks for having me, Billy, and having us, Billy.
For sure. Well, thank you so much to Trey Lyle and Matt Atkins, my class of 2019 Virginia Tech alums and the co-hosts of Foul Ball Area for joining me on the latest edition of the Pulse with BP. Enjoy the World Series, everybody. Astros Phillies starts tonight. We'll see you next time. Have a great weekend.